of Gaza's largest city. It's a move that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says is critical for security. Here's a closer look.
The Israeli Security Cabinet early on Friday approved the plan to establish full military control over Gaza City. Netanyahu's office says the military will prepare to take control while providing humanitarian aid to civilians outside combat zones. Netanyahu told Fox News on Thursday that the goal is to take control of the entire Gaza Strip and remove the Hamas terror group from power.
We don't want to govern it. We don't want to be there as a governing body. We want to hand it over to Arab forces that will govern it properly without threatening us and giving Gazans a good life. That's not possible with Hamas.
He accused Hamas of brutality against both Israelis and Palestinians, saying the group uses civilians as human shields and manipulates food supplies.
Look at what they're doing to our people. Look at what they're doing to the way they massacred, raped, beheaded our people, our men and women, burned our babies. And they are really cruel to their own people, because when we try to take them away from the combat zones, they shoot them.
Hamas is calling the plan an attempt to derail negotiations. The announcement comes amid protests in Jerusalem against any expanded war. Hundreds gathered outside the Prime Minister's office on Thursday. They demanded an end to the military campaign in return for the release of all hostages. Israeli officials believe 50 hostages remain in Gaza, with only 20 thought to still be alive. Netanyahu says rescuing them remains a top priority.
We're doing everything in our power to salvage the hostages. Without military pressure, nothing works.
But the UN warns expanding operations could be catastrophic for civilians and further jeopardize the safety of the hostages. After nearly 2 years of war, Israel says it now controls about 3/4 of Gaza. Most of the population has been displaced multiple times, and aid groups warn the enclave is on the verge of famine.
Now, Netanyahu just released a statement regarding Israel's plans for Gaza. He says the military won't occupy the enclave, but rather free it from Hamas. He added that Gaza will be demilitarized and a peaceful civilian administration will be established. International leaders are now reacting to Israel's plan to expand in Gaza. The American ambassador to Israel is among the officials making a statement. Take a look.
We care very much about the way things go forward, but it's never been the role of the U.S. to dictate Israel's policy any more than it would be the policy of Israel to dictate our policy.
European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen says Israel must reconsider its plan to take control of Gaza City. At the same time, she's also calling on Hamas terrorists to release all remaining hostages. Meanwhile, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer says Israel's decision to take control of the city is wrong. He's urging the Israeli government to reconsider. According to Starmer, the plan won't bring an end to the fighting or help secure the release of hostages. The Israeli government says it plans to take control of the city while providing humanitarian and aid to civilians outside the combat zones. Vice President J.D. Vance is in Europe. Vance kicked off a trip in the United Kingdom with a meeting with British Foreign Secretary David Lammy today. Vance was asked about recognizing a Palestinian state and the situation in Gaza.
Well, it's one of the things that we're going to talk about. Obviously, the United Kingdom is going to make its decision. We have no plans to recognize a Palestinian state. I don't know what it would mean to really recognize a Palestinian state, given the lack of a functional government there. You know, what the president has made very clear is our two goals are very simple right now vis-a-vis the situation in Israel and Gaza. Number one, we want to make it so that Hamas cannot attack innocent Israeli civilians ever again, and we think that has to come through the eradication of Hamas. Second, the president has been very moved by these terrible images of the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, so we want to make sure that we solve that problem. I think all of us can work on how to solve that problem. Obviously, it's not an easy problem to solve, or it would have already been dealt with. But we share, I think, that focus and that goal. We may have some disagreements about how exactly to accomplish that goal, and we'll talk about that today.
Vance was also asked about the 2028 election. The vice president says he is not focused on the next presidential contest. The comments come after President Trump recently suggested he was a front-runner to replace him. Vance says he is not even really focused on the election in 2026, much less 1 to 2 years after that. Vance says if they do a good job for the American people, the politics will take care of itself. And joining us now to discuss Benjamin Netanyahu's plan to occupy Gaza City is David Wormser. Middle East Affairs analyst at the Center for Security Policy and former senior advisor to U.S. Vice President Cheney on the Middle East and strategic affairs. David, always great to see you. Thanks for coming on today. So the Israeli Security Cabinet has approved the plan. Would you characterize this new development as an escalation in the war, or perhaps a new phase shifting now to occupation?
Yeah, I think you captured it well in the second half there with the new phase. An escalation, it certainly is also part. But it is not really a fundamental ground shift that it seems. I mean, at first one, here's the occupation of Gaza, and then you look under the lid, and it's occupation of Gaza City. And what Israel's really doing right now, it seems, is they're taking the northern third of Gaza final. But then they think that maybe that will be enough of a hit to Hamas that they'll come back to the negotiating table and still work out a deal. And that's important for the Israelis because an invasion of all of Gaza in one shot most likely will get all the hostages killed. And the Israeli government isn't willing to write off the lives of the remaining living 20 hostages. So they're still trying to essentially build leverage against Hamas to try to bring them down to their knees to give in and give up the remaining hostages.
Okay, can you elaborate on that point? You mentioned bringing Hamas back to the negotiation table. What core problems is this move trying to solve?
Well, the core problem is that Hamas still has put forward demands, actually increasingly rigid and intransigent demands, after the Europeans went ahead and recognized or said they would recognize a Palestinian state. It actually hardened the position of Hamas, and their position is essentially they will give up the hostages only when Israel withdraws from Gaza, and and the world guarantees that Israel will not attack Hamas, which continues to rule in Gaza at that point, and only at the end of which will all the hostages be released. So essentially, it would be an end of the war, guaranteed internationally, so that Israel cannot stop Hamas from rearming and rebuilding, and a restoration of Hamas's control over all of Gaza, and possibly not even then, because the hostages are released, because the hostages are at the end of that. So Israel would have to essentially accept surrender and defeat in Gaza and return to the status quo of October 6th prior to the war's beginning, rather than get back its hostages and remove Hamas from power. That, of course, also violates American policy.
Okay, can you talk to us about the potential military and political implications of this move?
Well, politically in Israel, first of all, half the country is terrified that this will lead to the death of the hostages. And that, of course, in Israel is a political hot potato. There really is a feeling that you can't leave these people behind and you can't give up on them, and that there would be a rip in the fabric of Israeli society if the government did anything that knew would lead to the death of the hostages. On the other hand, you have other half of the country basically saying you can't, you've got hundreds of hostages in the future and dead Israelis if you let Hamas rule Gaza. So there's a fundamental divide there. The United States is more on the side of Israel's government, which argues that they must not lose this war. Hamas must be removed from power so that you never again can have another October 7th. The other side are the Palestinians, that there is a feeling in Israel and in the United States that the Palestinians would best be served by a rapid destruction of Hamas and putting in power an international structure of distribution of aid and governance that is humane and gets food to everybody, rather than the terrorist structure that's under Hamas. So and that divides the United States and Israel from Europe, which believes the other way around.
So there's a lot of debate, as you alluded to just now. Can you compare to and contrast as well for us the IDF Chief of Staff's plan to encirclement and targeted airstrikes, which is more limited than an occupation of Gaza City?
The Chief of Staff's plan, the IDF Chief of Staff's plan, is essentially a continuation of what we've seen, and it's really a continuation of the policy the Biden administration preferred, which is that Israel not hold territory, not get itself in the business of being in control of civilian populations, and instead it goes in when it has intelligence, it goes in, gets a leader, comes out, and in doing that, you whittle away at Hamas's command and control, and you whittle away at their ability to function. And at some point, the expectation is Hamas would either choose to negotiate and deal or collapse, both of which would lead to the freeing of the hostages, which wouldn't be threatened in a static position. Those opposing that say, first of all, this has been tried and it doesn't work. Hamas hasn't given in. Two, their command and control is not weakening necessarily. And three, the hostages are dying as we speak, because they're being starved to death. So there is no long term. There is no pressure that could be implied over 6 months or 12 months. So there's a real fundamental divide between the Chief of Staff's plan, which is very much in line with what we've seen for the last 2 years, and the new plan, which is the beginning of a fundamental shift. And I emphasize beginning. It's not the full fundamental shift yet.
Do you think the new plan could draw out the war even longer, and perhaps expanding ground operations could pose increased risk to civilians?
Well, it certainly increases some risk to civilians. It decreases risk to Israeli soldiers, and it increases risk to Israeli hostages, but also increases risk to Hamas and its governance when Palestinians in Gaza begin to realize that Israel's going all the way and is going to take out Hamas. Then a lot of them will make their political calculations, and they'll give intelligence, they'll help, and even collaborate with the Israelis. Right now, collaboration is a death sentence. And they know if Hamas rules at the end, they're going to face that, which is why none of these pressures worked until now. So yes, there are definitely risks and dangers with this escalation. On the positive side, though, it will bring the war to an end. It will end when the Israeli ground operation conquers all of Gaza, which is a few months. And then you move on to the post-war era, which is both no more shooting, but second of all, reconstruction and an understanding of where we go with the Palestinian community there.
And David, can we also talk about the international reaction to this new development? You've already seen the position of the UK, European Union. Do you think this will impact Israel's relations with certain Western countries?
It definitely does. The Israelis have their hostages starving to death deliberately by Hamas. And what they're seeing is European countries are buckling under the pressure and recognizing a Palestinian state without even getting the hostages out. And this is embittering the Israelis. They feel abandoned by Europe. On the other hand, they feel very encouraged by the United States and its support. At this point, the Israelis believe any recognition of a Palestinian state will be interpreted by the Palestinians in the Arab world and their enemies as a validation of the attack on October 7th. It will directly couple October 7th to these recognition of states. And the Israelis are terrified of what that means, not only for themselves, but for the West's position there. So the Israelis are in quite a state of tension right now with numerous European countries. They, in Europe, depend on Israel considerably for intelligence sharing and cooperation on terrorism. And there's definitely discussion in Israel right now about limiting or halting some of that discussion with Europe.
So if Israel achieves military control over Gaza City, what are the possible outcomes for governance in Gaza? Perhaps a non-Hamas aligned Arab force?
Well, yeah, there's two parts to it. The first of all is the population has moved south, and then eventually Israel goes into those areas, and the populations are moved through filters to safe areas. And that essentially filters out Hamas and leaves what's left as a free fire zone where only those who are there are those who want to be there and fight Israel. They're not the civilian population anymore. So there's that. And the first process of that is Gaza City. The second part of that is it brings all the humanitarian distribution structure to the civilian population, which at that point is under Israeli control. It will bring it to a point where the GHF, the American structure, can distribute the food for free without Hamas pulling money from that, confiscating the food and selling it at exorbitant rates for funding. That's how Hamas right now funds itself. So it would also choke to death the funding structure of Hamas. So this is the strategy, and this is how it works with the civilian population. But the intention at the end is to bring the entire civilian population under Israeli control so that the entire humanitarian distribution structure comes under international effective control in the United States. And then that opens the door for the Arab countries and the rest to come in and administer, essentially govern the territory.
Well, okay, David, great insight as always, and always appreciate your time. Thank you.